Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Laura Prada from the Telesur studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. You stay with us. And we begin with the news. Vaccinations against Ebola are now being administered in Goma City in the Democratic Republic of Congo after the first case was recorded this week. With fears of an imminent spread of the virus in its populous city, the World Health Organization has started reinforcing awareness and prevention of the disease. Goma had been preparing for Ebola outbreak for months by setting up hand-washing stations, vaccinating 3,000 healthcare workers and running an operational treatment center since February. Almost 1,700 people have lost their lives to the highly contagious disease during the last 11 months of the epidemic.
It's important that the community provides us with their total collaboration. It is also important for the community to follow procedures. Those lists of patients' contacts have to undergo a daily health check over a period of 21 days, and these people have to be vaccinated for their own protection. So, adhering to public health measures is the key in containing the Ebola epidemic here in Goma.
And as the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to grapple with the Ebola epidemic, the health minister is warning against the use of religious practices to cure the disease. Let's hear how he said it.
They must behave responsibly and tell themselves, in types of epidemic, we must stop the practice of laying of hands. Ebola is a reality. Ebola is not supernatural. Ebola is not paranormal. Ebola is a disease that is caused by a virus. It is a disease that is curable when patients are treated very early.
Meanwhile, health workers are shaking people crossing the border between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda for signs of the illness. Ebola is a virus that causes severe bleeding, organ failure, and can lead to death. Humans may spread the virus to other humans through contact with bodily fluids. Initial symptoms include fever, headache, muscle pain, and chills, and is very transmittable when people are still dead. And now we move on to the Caribbean because Puerto Rico continues being the news because tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets of the Caribbean island this Wednesday evening in the biggest show of opposition so far, the governor Ricardo Rosselló. They marched along the waterfront past the Capitolio in San Juan to demand the governor's immediate resignation. The protests were initiated a week ago by various trade unions and progressive parties after revelations of a private social media chat managed by Rosselló and members of his administration that included many insulting, sexist and homophobic comments. A number of prominent actors and musicians have joined those protests in which not only they were protesting because of the scandal caused after these revelations, but also because they added up to the corruption scandal surrounding the government of Rosselló.
If our leaders are so bad, we cannot fall to their game. Puerto Rico, let's keep moving forward, united, strongly, and decisively.
And as the huge demonstrations drew to a close, riot police fired tear gas in the colonial part of the city in Old San Juan in order to disperse protesters. Many were left gasping for breath as the police made a number of arrests. Although triggered by the revelations of Rosselló's chat, the protests expressed months of pent-up anger over the economic crisis, mass layoffs, and the administration's failure to deal with the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in 2017, which caused more than 5,000 deaths. Rosselló's chat included jokes about corpses piling up in the under-resourced morgues of the country. Those corpses belong to the victims of Hurricane Maria death. And now we move on to Nicaragua because they are gearing up to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Sandinista revolution this Friday, 2 days before the victory was complete on the 17th of July 1979. Dictator Anastasio Somoza fled the country. So let's take a look back at that historic event, which became known as the Day of Joy.
Aldo Díaz-Lacayo is a diplomat, writer and historian. He remembers it as if it were yesterday, that day on July 17, 1979, when he was in El Salvador with a group of exiled people. He remembers having called the then ambassador and demanding that he hand over the embassy, this being a legal request. Díaz-Lacayo believes this day should be called National Liberation Day.
The Day of Joyfulness is the continuation of a struggle that began on May 4, 1927, with the National Dignity Day, when Sandino rejected the Moncada Pact with the U.S. It's a day which was reached after 52 years, and now we are reaffirming our national liberation.
The deaths, the suffering of hundreds of thousands, the repression was left behind, but it left an indelible mark. Carlos Fonseca, son of the founder of the Sandinista Liberation Front, said that although he was only 12 years old, he remembers coming from Cuba with his family and they were stranded in Panama since the final offensive had already begun. He feels privileged of being born in a country with the triumph of the only armed revolution after the Cuban Revolution.
With this, the military dictatorships which were imposed by the United States lost their validity. Imperialism was forced to surrender to the idea that these dictatorships no longer served them. The Sandinista revolution signified the end of an era of military dictatorships in Latin America.
At the 22nd August Plaza, with music, chanting and art exhibit, people celebrate the day of national joy. Indira Pinta demonstrates her work, which is inspired during the victorious month of July.
It's an abstract painting, and each person can interpret it as they want. When I painted it, I felt the joy of a young man fighting when I was 14-15 years old, seeing his family happy and shouting, "No one gives up," because no one wanted to give up at that moment. They wanted to win, in order to see a free Nicaragua. That's why my painting is called Rebellion.
On July 19, 1979, the board of the government of National Reconstruction, based in the city of León, entered Managua, the capital, and certified the triumph of the popular struggle.
And from Nicaragua, we move on to Chile, where more than 400 teachers have marched in Valparaíso and Viña del Mar to show their support for the nationwide strike, which has already been going on for 7 weeks. Teachers have been on a strike since early June after the National Teachers Union had recently rejected, with 80% majority, the government's latest proposal to change their working conditions. Until now, Education Minister Marcela Cubillos hasn't reached out to the strikers to restart negotiations. And this Thursday marked 10 years since the United Nations declared July 18th as Nelson Mandela International Day. On this day, people from around the world highlight Nelson Mandela's 67 years of selfless dedication to peace and goodwill. More in the following report from our special contributor in South Africa, Johannes Abrahams.
And after that, I think we will get you guys to interview each other.
We have democracy today because of him. Mandela was a hero and still a hero. Even though he died, we're still living in his legacy.
These grade 11 pupils form part of South Africa's Born Freeze, children born after the fall of apartheid.
This day is very special to all of us because it is the day where a legend was born.
Leaders in government also pay tribute to Mandela and his legacy of solidarity with countries that supported them during the fight against the apartheid regime.
His heart was deeply ensconced in those feelings of solidarity and internationalism, that ours was a victory possible only with the support of people throughout the world. We must never forget that lesson. And we too must act in similar manner with others in other countries that are confronting the same problems.
Mr. Tsinoli also says it's important for children to embrace the Mandela legacy.
Work to continue to keep alive the values that Madiba represented as a leader of the African National Congress and as a leader of the country continues to inspire many, including children.
I think we as a youth, we are the future of this country, and we must do more to keep the Mandela legacy alive.
On this day, thousands of people and organizations around the world take part in various charity activities to celebrate Mandela Day. Johan Abrams for Telesur in Cape Town, South Africa.
And like this, we go to a first break here from the South. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Telesur English and on my account, of course, at Laura P. Telesur. Stay with us. And we are back with the news. The UN has warned that time is running out for the international community to find a lasting solution to the war in Yemen. Under Secretary General for Human Rights, Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Mark Lowcock said failure to end the conflict would deepen the humanitarian crisis in the country. The 4-year conflict has killed thousands, displaced millions, and left 24 million in need of humanitarian assistance.
Conditions for most people in Yemen are getting worse, not better. And if the current trajectory continues, we should all expect that they will continue to get worse. The fighting rages on. Since June, 120,000 more people have fled their homes, bringing total displacement this year to more than 300,000 people, on top, of course, of the millions forced to flee in earlier years.
And United Nations have reached an agreement with Yemen's Houthi fighters to allow the World Food Programme to distribute food in Houthi-controlled areas. This was revealed by United Nations Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, during a meeting at the UN headquarters in New York. Griffiths said the agreement will allow UN teams to work with the Houthis to deliver food to the millions of citizens who are currently unable to access food due to the ongoing conflict between the Houthis and a Saudi-led coalition.
Progress in Hodeidah will allow the parties to work together, whether on tripartite monitoring, collection of revenues, or on common assessments of possible ceasefire violations. My hope, of course, is that progress in Hodeidah will finally allow us to focus on the political process, and I hope that we will see this before the end of this summer. Yemen, indeed, as we have observed before, has no time to waste.
And now we go to South Africa because the National Defence Force has deployed soldiers in Cape Town to help quell escalating gang violence. This follows a visit by the police minister after a dozen people were killed earlier this month. According to officials, about 2,000 people have been killed in the past 7 months, half of them related to gun violence. The deployed soldiers are to remain in Cape Town until October.
I'm just glad they brought the army in and that they can get these gangsters out of our communities. I hope they can bring more sports and other activities into our communities, like it was in the past when we were young.
I'm really thankful that they are here, the army are here. What? And I want to thank the government for making that good decision. We really need them. Because I mean, it's children, people's dying every day on our street.
And now we go to Sudan, where thousands have marched towards Khartoum to honor the memory of fellow protesters who have lost their lives. They were during the mass protest that began in December of last year. First to demand the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir and later to demand that the military hand over power to civilians. Hundreds of civilians have died since then, often at the hands of security forces. On Wednesday, protest leaders signed a power-sharing agreement with military leaders to pave the way for democratic elections. The two groups are set to meet again on Friday to negotiate key details of how the transition period will be managed.
We need democracy, we need freedom, we need equity, we need to build this country in sustainable development and to make use of our large sources, natural sources of Sudan. The Sudan is a rich country, but unfortunately, because of the corruption, because of the bad government that ruled Sudan for 30 years, so now we are in this situation.
We will proceed with this revolution until all our demands are met. Even though an agreement was reached, we will not accept a military rule but a civilian one. The agreement that was reached between the Forces for Freedom and Change and the Military Council has not satisfied our demands. However, the country is now heading in the right direction.
Time for a second and very short break. Just stay tuned with us.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. On Monday, only on Venezuela.
Back with the information, racism debate in the United States continues to intensify after recent comments from President Donald Trump in which he told a number of congresswomen they should go back to their countries. The outrage that followed forced many members of Congress to come out against Trump's hate speech.
For many, President Donald Trump's racism is no longer up for debate after he lashed out against 4 congresswomen of color, telling them to return to the country from where they came from, despite the fact all 4 are U.S. citizens. Following his comments, with 240 votes in favor and 187 against, the House of Representatives approved a resolution to strongly condemn the comments by President Donald Trump, which have legitimized and strengthened fear and hate against U.S. citizens of color. Nonetheless, the Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi, insisted that this was not an attack on the president.
And by the way, in the most gentle way. You have no idea the provisions that some people wanted to have in that resolution. This was as benign. It condemned the words of the president, not the president, but the words of the president.
The congresswomen Trump calls his squad are women of African, Arab, and Latino descent who have been critical of his administration. Kalna Hama, a black Muslim woman who's the only one of the 4 Democrats to not be born in the United States but Somalia.
This is the agenda of white nationalists. Whether it is happening in chat rooms or it's happening on national TV, and now it's reached the White House garden.
But despite the many times Trump has proved to be a racist and a xenophobe, Republican members of Congress continue to insist his remarks are not actually racist, but an expression on whether people support him or not.
Well, I think the president is in a tug-of-war with his opponents. The question is, do I think the president's a racist? No, and let me tell you why. If you're a Somali refugee and you're wearing a MAGA hat and you're a big Trump fan, you'd probably be having dinner at the White House. So he lashes out at people who are critical of him and his view that are hurting the country, and that's what this is all about.
But racism in the United States does not only revolve around the president. Structural racism and widespread abuse against minorities has only gotten worse in the recent years, as rise of neofascism spreads across the globe.
And from United States, we will talk now about Iran because the Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has held talk with United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The details of the meeting have not yet been disclosed, and the meeting comes amidst increasing tensions between Donald Trump's administration and Iran. On Wednesday, President Trump claimed that U.S. warship had shot down an Iranian drone in the Strait of Hormuz. However, in an interview with journalists before the meeting with Guterres, Zarif said he had no information about the loss of any Iranian drone.
The issue of the drone is still under investigation. Based on the latest information I received from Tehran, we have so far absolutely no information about losing a drone.
And Iran has also reportedly seized a foreign tanker suspected of smuggling fuel in the Persian Gulf. The country's state media made the announcement on Thursday, when 12 crew members have also been detained. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says that the ship had been smuggling 1 million liters of fuel, and it is not yet confirmed if the vessel is from the United Arab Emirates-based Riyadh tanker, which had stopped transmitting its position as it sailed through the Strait of Hormuz on Sunday. Meanwhile, 2 Iranian vessels carrying corn are stranded in Brazil following their failure to fuel due to U.S. sanctions. The ships have come marooned in port of Paranagua since the first week of July after state oil company Petrobras declined to sell fuel to them, citing U.S. sanctions. The Iranian government has in the past said these sanctions are making it difficult for ordinary people to access basic needs such as food. And Carola Rackete, the German captain of the migrant rescue vessel Sea-Watch 3, appeared in an Italian court this Thursday. Rackete was sworn by journalists as she refused to make any comments on her way into the building. She is suspected to answer charges of aiding illegal immigration. The 31-year-old was arrested in Italy on June 29th after refusing to comply with a ban on entering Italy's territorial waters. She docked the vessel carrying more than 40 migrants in Lampedusa after weeks at sea. And thousands of South Korean trade unions members have gathered in front of the National Assembly building to protest against the government's labor policies. The Korean Confederation of Trade Unions have called on the government to cancel labor law reforms, which they say would worsen working conditions. Unions also want large firms to be reformed and the minimum wage to be raised to $8.50 per hour, which President Moon Jae-in had promised to implement by 2020. Some 50,000 union members joined demonstrations held nationwide. Like this, we come to the end of this report, but remember, you can find this and much more other information on our website, terrestrenglish.net, where you can find opinion articles, watch special interviews, and find so much more other materials that we produce especially for you. Continue with us with Telesur, always together, connecting the global thoughts. Until next time, thank you for watching.